Hello and welcome to Skeleton Songs.
Hello and welcome to Skeleton Songs.
It's been such a long time.
I know, we were going to do it ages ago, then we got ill, and then I kept being stuck in coding. And
I went on holiday.
Oh yeah, you went to an island by helicopter, didn't you?
Officially not, because my dad would be cross if I did.
Right.
So I definitely didn't do that, but I did go away. And then we've been working on things like a Switch port of Cultist Simulator.
Tell me about the Switch port of Cultist Simulator. When's that coming out?
Oh, well, we can't say yet. This is coming out on Friday,
okay.
and this is a secret fun thing. But anyway, we're doing a Switch port, and that's very exciting. So we've been busy with that. And we released German and Japanese, just 2 languages, casually.
Yeah, we did. Freaking alphabets and glyphs and pictograms.
Yeah, you've been learning lots about...
I have, Unicode.
All the fun things. But yeah, so basically we had an excuse. Don't be cross.
Well, one of the results of us having come back to this later, of course, is that I've found my notes for this podcast, and they're not very helpful. What it said is, Chthonic, Dionysian, no picnic. Why are werewolves less interesting? Pliny the Elder, Arcadia, 9 years flesh. And I've been Googling that, trying to find out what the hell it was they called.
Yeah, that's like a horrible nightmare.
And Ajran. I know what that is, but I'll come to that.
Aslan written in your bad writing. We should explain to listeners what the hell we're talking about. We did actually make a promise in episode 5 when we talked about how awful women were and how nobody likes them. And we said we would come back and do a whole episode on Maenads and Kittens. And people, we keep our promises. So here we are, late, with lots of good facts about, as far as I can tell, violent, mad women and felines.
Yeah, so I think what I was aiming for when I said Dionysian, no picnic, is...
Don't go on a picnic with a Maenad?
I mean, don't expect to come back from a picnic with a Maenad. But one of the things about Maenads, especially, you know, if you watch your True Blood, is people kind of think of them as sexy. And I guess, you know, people who run around in an animalistic frenzy naked, ladies or otherwise, you know, often there's something sexy going on. But what really stays with me about Maenads is how frightening they are.
Well, they're sexy up until the point that they rip you apart, aren't they?
Well, I think they're not even necessarily sexy up until that, because, you know, they don't. You can't. They may be doing things with each other, but they're certainly, you know, their primary motive is to go and run around and really let go and perform rites in honour of Dionysus. So although they're...
Well, that's what I was going to say, because surely, I mean, they're not sexy now because they do tear people apart and eat them, and you know, let's all... There might be a small fetish on the internet, but we're not part of that fetish, and it's not cool and sexy. But I thought the original point was that these women who otherwise would have been sort of tethered by quite a lot of law.
So this is what I'm saying, is we have this idea of them as basically proto-feminists or chthonic feminists who are letting it all hang out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's something in that, and sometimes there's explicitly something in that, but usually there's not. So one big thing is, who do Maenads serve?
Dionysus.
Who is a...
male god.
Right. So...
But they rip apart men.
They do.
Typically.
But one of the reasons they rip apart men is that men aren't fans of Dionysus. And this is...
I didn't know that.
The Bacchae, which is...
Is he a lady god?
No.
I mean, is he a god worshipped primarily by women?
No. I mean, Maenads are women, but he wasn't.
But why didn't men like?
So what I was going to say is, and not any kind of expert on Greek tragedy, and I don't understand the Bacchae at all. But as far as I can make out, it is an account of King Pentheus not paying Dionysius the honour he's due, and consequently, he gradually gets obsessed with Dionysiac things, and he ends up losing his mind. There's this very haunting bit where he sees 2 suns in the sky. I don't understand.
Oh my God.
And then he goes off, I think, to dress as a woman and spy on the women. And at Dionysus's behest, they tear him to pieces. And I think his mother thinks he's a lion, and she brings back his head cradled in her arms to show off, and then realises it's not a lion.
And this is a curse from Dionysus himself, because he didn't get the respect that he deserved from the sky.
It is, although one of the interpretations of it, and I don't know how much the original text supports this, is that you got your Dionysian, you got your Apollonian, and if you try to keep your Dionysian, your dark, passionate, duende-ish feelings down in the basement, and never acknowledge them, then they come out and get you. And there's a an opera, The Bassarids, which W.H. Auden and a lover of his, a poet whose name escapes me, wrote, and it's explicit in that Pentheus has not acknowledged the Dionysiac side of nature and of his nature, and so if you deny something, it devours you. There's that wonderful Anita Mason quote, which I think I've mentioned before, along the lines of, in all the universe, there's only a twingeness, and if a thing is kept from its opposite, it becomes its opposite. So there's that. But the Bassarids thing, the fact that it was called, the place called the Bassarids, Maenads are sometimes called the Bassarids because they wear a bassaris, which is apparently Greek for a fox skin, which is associated with the rites of Dionysus. Dionysus sometimes wears one. And
like a ruff?
I think it's like I don't know, because I guess it's not very big, is it? So,
well, that's because they're naked, so there could be some sort of little bikini effect, or it could be some like little kind of, I've just been hunting.
You go straight to the practical, don't you?
I just feel like...
Now I know.
I mean, as a woman, I feel like I want to know if these ladies are going to catch cold.
I think you have to ask Dionysus.
I'm a bit scared.
That's fair.
But I'm a bit repressed, really, as a British person.
What it made me think is that it's sort of noticeable that I can't find any stories about Maenads, Bacchantes changing shape. I can find lots of examples of them dressing as animals, behaving like animals, tearing people apart with their bare hands, running on all fours, but they never actually become physically animals in any of the myths I've seen.
Isn't that a thing, though? I thought it was gods who would turn humans into animals, usually for punishment. And I've never heard of a Greek myth where a human actually can change shape, and I think there might be some distinction there, that the Maenads serve Dionysus and kind of conjoin themselves with the wild world in a way that most people don't, but they can never cross over without becoming something more.
I think you're right, actually, and I think when I think about all the shape changes in Greek mythology, there are shape changes who aren't gods, but they often have some sort of divine or supernatural aspect. And I know that you get werewolves in Greek folklore, but I've no idea how much later that comes in. But then turn that around, I think it's interesting as well. Why do we have stories all across the world of people changing shape, and we don't have them in this context? What caused them to be left out? And I've got a tenuous segue from there to something I'm going to assert and tell you if you think it's true or not. It's that werewolves are boring.
They are. And
Maenads are not boring.
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned earlier True Blood, which is probably the most pop culture example of Maenads. And I found out, actually, fun bit of trivia. Do you know who plays the Maenad in True Blood?
I'm afraid I do, because I'm an old school nerd. But do you want to tell our listeners?
It's Ensign Rowe!
It is Ensign Rowe.
From Star Trek
Michelle
Next
Forbes.
Generation. I love her. Anyway, until she betrays me.
How did she betray you?
By Ensign Rowe. We can't talk about it, but don't trust her, people, even though she's great. But my point is, in that show, which I loved, the first 2 or 3 seasons, there are shapeshifters as well as vampires and Maenads and ultimately, I'm sorry to report, fairies. And Dionysus appears to be trying to stop this podcast. I don't know if you can hear.
We have a violent storm battering against the window, so let's see if we make it to the end of the podcast.
Everyone can be happy that they're not here.
No,
and we can hope that we close the windows. Should we stop?
Let's keep going and see if it's audible afterwards.
Okay, sure. If we drown, just please phone Boris Johnson and tell him to come save us. But my point was, True Blood has lots of different factors, and inexplicably, the shapeshifters are one of the least interesting ones. The kind of werewolf factors are just kind of angry, hairy people who have this constant boring cycle of, oh no, it's going to be a full moon, and for drama reasons, I hope I don't turn into a werewolf, but I do. Whereas something like the Maenads have this like really dark backstory that no one really understands. I think partly it's because viewers don't come with preconceptions about Maenads. A lot of people know, oh, they were crazy people who ripped people apart, but beyond that our knowledge is very limited. So when you start saying things like the Dionysian chaotic underbelly of human nature that is normally repressed, that's immediately really interesting and really fertile ground.
It is, and I think you put your finger on the point I was struggling towards. So the essence of drama is...
You always tell me this. The essence of drama is people wanting something and not being able to have it, and the audience trying to work out what they want and why they can't have it.
Yeah. So the thing about werewolves in the original myth is there's a tension there, right? People turn into a beast and can't control what they do. They often don't know they've turned into a beast. That's part of the tragedy. Vampires, who are massively overexposed now, are still fundamentally
not as overexposed as the Maenads.
Tend to be,
but
excellent.
Thanks.
Lost the thread. Vampires, yes. Yeah, so it's fundamentally inconvenient to have to drink blood.
It is, and True Blood does a lot with that because it tries to modernise it and say what would they actually do if they lived in one society.
So this is the fundamental thing about vampires is they have to drink blood and they can't go about in the daylight, and there's all the other stuff, but those things are flaws and problems and potentials of drama. And werewolves, in most treatments of werewolves, they lose the bit where they lose their shit and go out eating people and can't change shape except at the full moon. For obvious reasons, it's really hard to write more than one story about that. You want them to be able to shift and change and do things, but then that takes away the tension of the story. But Maenads, again, they're still subject to this tension and these restrictions and these drives that forces them to behave in ways that are inconvenient.
Well, and
also, similarly, shape changes are just like werewolves, but without the character. So you can turn into an ocelot or an octopus or anything else beginning with O. It's
Well, we did our quiz recently to find out what our demons would be, so we know what we'll turn into.
I can't remember.
You'll turn into a hummingbird.
Oh yeah.
And I'll turn into a ferret.
Sugar.
So it's not the most terrifying Gothic story that we've ever mentioned, but hey. But what I find actually very interesting about this is the throwaway comment of the Maenads and the Kittens was us being frankly silly. And what I hadn't realised is in terms of Gothic portrayal of cats and Maenads, they're actually really similar because I was researching for this podcast what I was going to talk about in terms of Gothic cats, and what I've realised is they all tend to perform the same function in whatever story you pick, and that function is malicious but righteous vengeance, like frightening violence, but you are on their side because they are fundamentally correct in their retribution, and that is exactly what Maenads are. Very scary, and women are typically the ones who, with a loving mother figure, and we all like, so it's scarier to have a woman going nuts and biting your head off than it is a man. But also the Maenads usually do it for good reason, like they're having a right and someone wanders in, or I guess Dionysus told them to.
That's
Isn't
the
that
thing.
Interesting?
It is, and I hadn't thought of that. And
I can give you some examples.
There are lots of please do. But I was going to say lots of examples of Maenads tearing apart people who you really feel you'd rather wouldn't have been torn apart. But they generally, it's not like Maenads break into your house at night and pull your head off. You have to go and bother them.
Is it Actaeon with the story of Diana?
Yeah.
Or Artemis, I should say. And for people who don't know this myth, it's a very famous one of Artemis, the moon goddess, who's famously pious, and she's all about only being around ladies, and she hates men. And Actaeon spies her bathing in the woods, and she realises that he's been spying on her and gets very cross. And so she turns him into a hart, I believe, a deer, and then he is torn to death by his own hunting dogs. So that story, for example, which is a woman getting revenge on a guy, you actually feel really sorry for Actaeon because he didn't go out there to be pervy. He was wandering around doing his own business and saw this beautiful goddess and just thought, that's kind of sexy, I'll have a look. And so he did do something wrong, but you do feel sympathy with him. But I can't think of a story where Maenads have been involved where the person who has been destroyed is anything but either a sort of vessel or somebody who did deserve it.
I mean, I think deserve is a slightly loaded term, but certainly people...
But you come away with the feeling that, like, poetic justice has occurred.
Yeah, or a rule was broken and then a punishment was
meted out.
Enacted. You say that cats and Maenads are both enactors of vengeance. It occurs to me that cats I can easily see fitting into that role. I can think of examples. It's quite rare to see dogs described in that way. And similarly, werewolves are not.
I was thinking about that. I think there's a sense that cats, in the same way that Maenads straddle a threshold. So cats on one level are small and furry and pretty and elegant, but on another level, they're terrifying hunters who we have domesticated. They're both the sort of spirit of the wild with big teeth, but they're small and they live in our house. And Maenads are lovely domesticated women who are all very pretty and wear makeup, but also will literally pull your nads off with their teeth. So again, it's the same sense of unease.
I'm crossing my legs.
just identifying with the character here. And yes, I think the problem with dogs and wolves and that kind of stuff is I know everyone loves a hashtag good doggo, but dogs I think are more frightening intrinsically because they're bigger and they do have a greater tendency to like eat their owners, and wolves they're just wild animals. You don't domesticate wolves. So I think there is something.
Yeah, you don't get the tension again. But you said you get examples. I want to hear examples.
Literally, there is now thunder here, so I do think that we're angering some god, which means that we're doing well. I'm excited by this. So there's a couple of examples. There's one that really scares you, I think, which is actually not Gothic at all. It's modern. It's by Vernon Scannell, a modern British poet. And I'm not going to read all of it. It's called A Case of Murder, and it's often used by British English teachers to teach.
Many poems that make you go, ooh.
He's literally pulling. It is really horrible. And the essential premise, it's very short, so do Google it and read it. It's fantastic. And the essential premise is there's a boy who's left alone, a little boy, 8-year-old, something like that, left alone in the house with a cat, and he's a bit scared of this big, horrible black cat, and he ends up accidentally or possibly deliberately murdering it.
It's a little column
it's unclear. And then feeling quite guilty about it and stuffing it in a cupboard full of spiders. And just the end of it is. And though it died, it's grown in that cupboard, and its hot low purr grows slowly louder year by year. There'll not be a corner for the boy to hide when the cupboard swells and all sides split and the huge black cat pads out of it. Like, and that's a great example, because he doesn't talk about how scary the cat is. He doesn't say the cat was covered in goo and had big hats on it that said, I'm going to kill you, and it wore a big scary Jason murder killer mask, whatever. It just says it's a big black cat, but intrinsically in that image already is this frightening enough monster that anyways, that's a great modern example of just a cat as an example of actually righteous vengeance, because this little boy should not probably have murdered his pet and stuffed it in the cupboard and pretended it was fine, which it wasn't. But two more Gothic examples is one. I do apologise for the terminology here. The Squaw by Bram Stoker, which we now modernly update to Cat's Cradle.
Right.
But originally it was called Squaw in 1893, and it's a story of a dastardly American, I'm glad to say, who, I won't bore you with the backstory, ends up accidentally killing a kitten. He doesn't mean to, but he throws a pebble on the head of a kitten from quite a long way away, and it dies. And its mother is there, and she initially licks this poor kitten's wound in a hope of kind of reviving it. And when she realises that it's dead, she turns her cold yellow eyes to this American, and she begins to essentially stalk him. And it's a very short story. Again, you can read this in about, I don't know, half an hour. And he, of course, handily has gone to see a old castle which has a torture chamber in it. And he sort of laughs and tells a story about how this... he knew an Apache woman whose child was murdered by an American soldier, and she stalked him for 3 years until she tortured him to death, and he, this American, had ever ultimately killed her and tried to rescue her, the American soldier, but he was too late. And he said that was the only time he ever saw this Apache lady happy, was when she was ultimately responsible for wreaking vengeance upon this man who killed her kid. And as he's telling the story, he wanders into the torture museum, and there's an Iron Maiden, and then the cat reappears, and it doesn't go well. So again, it's a really nasty, violent story, like much, I think, scarier than Dracula. And the cat is this really scary mechanism for this really bloody revenge on this guy who kind of did a bad thing and didn't really care much about it. It's not like he did the worst thing, but he murdered this cat's kitten, and she's not having it. So that's one great example, I think, of the cat motif in the Gothic. And the other is, have you read The Black Cat?
Poe.
By Poe.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
It's
a bit silly.
It is. Well, I mean, that's Poe, isn't it? It's a bit silly, but also there he gets under your skin, and it's Black Cat's as guilt again, isn't it? It's this
very
thing...
much and revenge, except with a little side note of magic, because it's Poe. So again, the central theme is this black cat, helpfully called Pluto, is mistreated by its owner to the point where ultimately it is murdered. And I think it's actually hung by the owner. And then the next day, the cat appears again, except that it has a white crest, and now the crest has a black shape of a noose in the fur, and that's the only difference. And again, we have lots of Gothic tropes of, is it the narrator going mad? Is that actually happening? What's going on? And ultimately, the cat either drives its owner insane enough, or actually enacts some sort of actual revenge in the real world. But it doesn't go well for the main character, I'll tell you that. And again, we get the sense of, this domestic harmony at the start, upended. This creature that actually was once our friend is now actually quite feral and wild, and ultimately on this path that you cannot stop. And I think that's one of the things about Maenads as well. I think one of the frightening things is not so much that they're women who will go mad and cover themselves in your blood. It's more that there is a sense that once they start, you can't really stop them, because all the normal rules are taken away. If you're fighting, hand-to-hand combat, if you kill the other person, then you win and it stops. but Maenads come in groups. And if you are fighting a duel, there are rules. Maenads don't have rules. They're in a frenzy. The whole thing is this frenzied state of being. And of course, this always takes place outside of urban areas, outside of houses. It's always in the woods, in nature. And kind of none of the rules apply, which is why I think it's so uncontrollable.
I guess the other way of looking at that is the Gothic notoriously is about places where the rules don't apply. So Maenads don't do anything to you as long as you stay inside the rules. But once you've stepped outside the rules, then you're in a space where things you don't understand apply. So,
I'm going to make a really pedantic change to your thing. I think it's not that the Gothic is about where rules aren't. I think the Gothic is about where you learn the rules and then you disobey them. Thinking of the classic kind of Bluebeard story or the Rebeccas or whatever it is, there's a sense of you understand how the world works, and there's usually one thing that you shouldn't do, and that's usually what you end up doing. Like, don't go into the spooky room at midnight. Oh no, you did, and there was a ghost.
I think you're right, but I think to take it up a level, part of the appeal of the Gothic in the Victorian age and now is that it's something from outside our comfortable existence, so we can sit and listen to the storm, which has stopped now, rattling the windows, and
hashtag buy Book of Hours next.
Throw another log on the fire. And not worry about it, because we're not going to break the rules, so we're going to be okay. And disaster films are not Gothic stories, because the disaster just comes through town and you have to get out of its way or hide in the cellar or gnaw your own leg off.
And that's one of the things that surprised me when I read Dracula for the first time, that actually I was expecting this sort of big disaster movie of like the undead coming to life and it being a zombie film essentially, and it isn't the scariest thing as when Dracula crosses the sea and comes to England.
Yes.
Because that's kind of the intruder walks amongst us, and
that's
is
exactly
far
the
more scary than
Victorian thing
if I
is-
go to Transylvania I'll get eaten, but if I don't go to Transylvania I'm fine, the same way that I will not go in the sea and a shark will not kill me.
If you go to one of the subject territories, then you don't know, what the natives have been up to. That sort of thing doesn't happen in England. You don't get vampires in England. That's an outrageous idea.
How frightening is that? And I think in Nosferatu, which is actually really haunting film, I think it's one of the most unsettling films I think I've ever seen, even though it's very old. There's a really prolonged bit of the film which is just seeing these coffins pile up in the square as Nosferatu stalks this rural town. And it's terrifying because you don't see, lots of blood or like an extended sequence where, you dramatic irony, he's there, but the character doesn't know he's there and eventually she gets killed. No, you just see these sort of lovely cobbled streets and beautiful light and then this increased amount of coffins and this sort of desperation, and it's awful because it's come inside. It's inside the walls.
It occurs to me as well, there's this, I've read often accounts of how the Imperial era plugged into the Gothic because you've got the stuff that is run properly and the stuff from outside. But also one of the things about Britain that I think is easy to overlook if you're from a more sensible country is that Britain is an island and England...
So we're constantly bringing things in.
Well, no, England has two land borders, but only with Wales and Scotland, which have been, sometimes enemies, but part of the same country for 400 years.
Yeah.
And that, I think, defines a lot of our psychology because we have an idea of the world as safely separate. It has to get across the sea if it's going to get to us.
That's a good point.
And I remember I was reading the Silk Road. I'm still reading the Silk Road.
It's a big book.
Very good. But it describes a number of the reasons why Britain pulled ahead. And natural resources are one. We got lucky with the mix at the right moment for the Industrial Revolution. But another big one, of course, is just the fact that we didn't have to spend on defence the same way that other European countries had to spend on defence.
Because what we had to see.
Yeah.
It's like the
really
Russian tactic of we're just Russia, so come get us if you can.
And, the English Channel is a lot less frightening than the Russian winter, but it's still...
You've got to have a boat, though.
Yeah, you can't
it stops
take
your
an army
average,
across
Chancer army. That's true. I hadn't thought about that.
There's another Gothic cat thing, which
Yeah.
has occurred to me. We talk about cats.
It's weird, isn't
and
it?
ladies and sex.
Cats. Oh gosh.
Well, it's a film I keep trying to convince you that we should watch.
Is this the one where the sexy 1940s people become cats at night?
I think that was the original. I think it was a remake, which has some sexy 1980s people. I think it's...
They're called cat people.
Is it Sam Neill and Natasha Kingsky?
Sam Neill?
I think it's Sam Neill. It's definitely Natasha Kingsky. So it is called Cat People. And yes, the thesis of Cat People...
is they are people who turn into cats.
But only under one very specific circumstance.
Is it after they have sex?
Yes, it is. And you know how they turn back?
Do they have to consume the flesh of another being?
They have to kill someone, yes. So
See, I don't need to see the film.
Well, again, that's why I'm looking at it. Another is you're already attuned to it, so you get so much out of it. But it strikes me that is, in most respects, totally different from everything we're talking about. Except, again, of course, it's about the rules and about, you break the rules and you have to stay chaste if you want to stay safe. And if you don't stay chaste, then you've got to start eating people, then you're off the hook and the rules don't apply.
And I think there probably is an edge of, forgive me for getting my soapbox here, of kind of sexism, with the sense that women are kind of these sexy creatures, but occasionally a bit scary, and cats are like sexy animals, aren't they? But sometimes you want to, I don't know, buy a kitten in a non-sexy way. I don't know. I'm glad that went on. What I meant was, if you were going to pick any animal for a woman to turn into, bearing in mind she's both sensual and murderous, you pick a cat.
You do, and men tend to be identified with
female
dogs or wolves, and
animal.
Dogs are more physically imposing, like us folks. Cats have higher pitched voices. Women are obviously cleaner and more elegant, but it does tend to go that way. I mean, I'm obviously a cat.
But
person,
I wasn't so much complaining about cat people. I was just saying,
but...
I think this is another weird connection between Maenads and kittens I didn't really know existed. That because there is this sort of violent sexual element where the two meet.
Yeah, I have a feeling. I can't remember. And my notes are incomprehensible. But I think panthers were associated with Dionysius and with Maenads. Well, I think so, but I somebody will write in and tell me I'm
so going
wrong.
Back to Maenads.
Yeah,
I admit that my knowledge of them is pretty shallow. So if I were a Maenad going for a Maenadic ritual, I know how it ends. But how does it start? Is there a specific sacrifice you bring along with you? Is it just a party that kind of goes crazier and crazier until someone's dead? Is it quite formal, actually?
Do they
really exist?
So again, well, yes. So this is what I was about to say. Is there's Maenads mythology and there's Maenads or Bacchantes or
because it was the Bacchanal, wasn't it? Isn't that what they did?
In fact, so because you don't get many first-hand accounts written by your actual Maenads, it's not really clear what happened in mythology or what happened in real life. And probably the good women of Athens who went out to honour Dionysus didn't tear people together with their hands.
I don't know, man. I've been to an all-girls school. Sometimes it got hairy.
But I think I was talking the other day about Clodius Pulcher and Bonadea.
I was wondering if you were going to mention this. This is quite a good...
Yeah, so there's a Roman goddess called Bonadea, which means the good goddess.
And no one knows her real name because it was women's
so it was
so we didn't bother to write that down.
A couple of nights a year.
God, it's so infuriating.
Women were allowed to have basically a girls' night in, and they'd bring the cult image of Bonadea out of her temple, and she'd actually be, I think, laying on a couch in the house, and they'd drink wine, which Roman women weren't normally allowed to drink strong wine, only the weak stuff.
Bet they did, though.
They'd perform sacrifices, which they weren't normally allowed to do in ceremonies. They'd actually spill blood, and they'd play games and musical instruments, and there might have been some illicit behaviour, but it was pretty mild illicit behaviour compared to sparagmos, the tearing apart of flesh with hands. But the men were forbidden the ritual. They couldn't see it. In theory, a man would be blinded if he'd seen it. There was all the boy babies had to be taken out of the house.
Get out, elsewhere. Tiny men.
Even the tomcats were sent away for the night.
Interesting.
And then this guy, Clodius Pulcher, who later on became a bit of a rabble-rouser, dressed up as a lady and got a slave girl to smuggle him into somewhere the rites were occurring.
Also, so doesn't his name mean beautiful Clodius?
No, Clodius, C-L-O-D. I don't know what that means, Clodius, but Pulcher means beautiful, yeah.
Beautiful Clodius. Great. Sorry, go on the story.
But it was Caesar's house. It was Caesar's mother and wife who were running the rites. So the story was that Clodius was trying to get it on with Caesar's wife, and that she'd been expecting him. But he got bored after the slave girl smuggled him in, so he sort of bimbled around the house looking for Caesar's wife. And eventually he ran into...
It's like Mr. Bean.
Well, exactly this. A lady who said, "I'm sorry, I don't know you." And he's like, "I'm just a lady, just looking for the..." And she said, "Hang on.
You're a man!"
Yeah, and he ran away, and they all chased him around the house with their lamps. And he got away. Or they threw him out of the house, rather. because they weren't Maenads, they were basically Roman patrons, and they didn't tear him limb from limb. But then it ended up being this astonishing cataclysmic scandal, and it's the origin of the phrase Caesar's wife, where Caesar divorced his wife on the spot. Because he said, he obviously didn't believe she'd been going to get up to anything with the intruder, but even the suspicion that she might have was insupportable for the chief priest, as he was at the time. And I forget the details, and it was complicated, but it was a major political scandal that changed the face of Rome, because this freaking idiot
Clodius
lad just broke into the house.
And he got off, didn't he? Hilariously.
He did, yes. I think the implication was that the jury had been heavily bribed, because he quite clearly had done it.
That's amazing. And do you want to have hazard a guess? Bueno dia? What's her name? Go on.
What, the name?
Yeah.
We're not going to say it. We just had a storm outside the windows. I'll get
That's true. It was a bit of a
tongue
warning,
ripped
wasn't
out
it?
of the root. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
But in terms of Maenad ceremonies, the one thing I was going to say is there are a lot of specific ritual accoutrements associated with them. I mean, I think this is the case with Greek cults generally, but I ended up using the names or references to a lot of these ritual accoutrements in Cultist Simulator. So like the Theosos, I think it's called, is a pine cone staff, or if you're feeling a little bit impure, it's a sort of vaguely wheelie shaped staff. But so Dionysius used to carry it around, and I used all these freaking words for incantations of the game, and every time a translator goes near them, I get a plaintive note saying, "What the hell does this mean?"
Yeah, you've not made the translator's job easy.
No, so thanks, Dionysius.
Another cultist comparison which struck me is one of the best modern stories of Maenadry that I've read is Donna Tartt.
Yes, I can't believe I didn't mention that. Yes.
So if you haven't read it, Donna Tartt, I think it's her masterpiece. It's absolutely brilliant. It's quite slow, and it starts off, and if you're expecting a Maenad story, then you might be like, is this the right book? But it is. And you call the whole of Cultist Simulator The Secret Histories, and Donna Tartt's book is The Secret History, which is all about Maenadry in New England, and how a lot of rules, a lot of proper modern life can change and can decay into this actually quite barbaric experience. But so yeah, top tip, read that. Not Gothic at all, but it is great. And we should end it. Really.
I think we should. Is this the end of the season? We've got one more.
We've got one more episode. We have decided that we're going to have 10 episodes per season, and we're going to do one more episode in the Gothic, which I think we're going to do in something like Star-Crossed Lovers, something quite sweet. We haven't decided yet. So there'll be one more after this, and then season 2 we're going to do, but we're going to probably change the overarching theme, because the Gothic is fun, but it's not infinite, and the world is very big and full of interesting things.
Bacon.
Yes, the next season of Skeleton Songs will be entirely about bacon.
Toilet bacon.
We did start this podcast by saying that we kept our promises, and now I'm going to have to scrub all of this from the record.
That wasn't a promise, that was just me saying words at random.
You were reading off your notes, weren't you, darling?
Have a spooky day.